She grabbed his wrist with both hands and said, "Please, don't go. I can't get up." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and her fingers were shaking so hard he could feel it through his coat sleeve. He looked down the hallway, empty. Every single door closed. He looked back at her. 70-some years old, sitting on the floor of a hospital corridor, trying to pull herself up against the wall, and not one person had stopped. He'd been walking past, too. Almost made it all the way to the exit. Almost, but before that hallway, before the hospital, before any of it, let me tell you who this man was. His name was Alton Jerome Peck, 63 years old, former pipe fitter, retired early, not by choice but by a back injury that left him with a permanent limp and a pension that didn't quite cover the gap. He lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur, Georgia, in a building where the elevator worked maybe 3 days out of 7. The second bedroom had been his daughter's. She'd moved to Phoenix 4 years ago for a job and a man, in that order, and called on Sundays when she remembered. He was not a man people looked at twice. That was something he'd accepted a long time ago. Big frame gone soft gray stubble he forgot to shave, thrift store flannel in rotation, a slight drag in his left leg that made strangers assume things about him that weren't true. He'd stopped correcting them. Every morning started the same. 5:50 a.m. He woke up before the alarm, because the pain in his lower back never quite let him sleep past it. He rolled to the edge of the mattress, sat there for a minute, just a minute, letting things settle. Then he stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen, and put on coffee. 1 cup. He didn't need 2 anymore. On the counter, 2 things. A prescription bottle of anti-inflammatories he was supposed to take with food, and a folded piece of paper he'd been carrying in his shirt pocket every day for 11 months. A lease agreement for a small commercial space on Commerce Drive. He'd circled the monthly rate in red pen, $1,450. Below that, in his own handwriting, minus rent, minus utilities, minus tools. Startup gap, $8,200. It was a number he'd been building toward for 2 years. Not a dream, exactly. Something more concrete than that. He'd spent 31 years fitting pipe in commercial buildings across Atlanta. And for half of those years he'd watched younger guys come in, not knowing which end of a wrench to hold. He'd trained a dozen of them himself, unofficially, on lunch breaks and after hours, because the union apprenticeship program had a 3-year wait list, and most of those kids couldn't wait. What he wanted was simple. A proper trades workshop. Nothing fancy. A rented space, some used equipment, and a rotating class of 8 to 10 people at a time who needed a skill and a start. He'd told his daughter about it once on a Sunday call. She'd said, "Dad, that sounds like a lot of work for someone with your back." He hadn't brought it up again. The $8,200 gap had been shrinking, slowly. He did small plumbing jobs on the side. Nothing that required him to crawl or lift, just diagnostics and fixes that let him sit or stand. He drove for a medical transport service 2 mornings a week, taking elderly patients to their appointments. He was good at it, quiet, patient, never rushed them. A lot of his passengers were scared, or lonely, or both. He'd learned not to fill silence with noise. That Tuesday, the transport job was a round trip to Grady Memorial. A 91-year-old man named Floyd who needed an infusion treatment and didn't have anyone to take him. Alton helped him in, helped him out. Sat in the waiting area for 2 hours, reading a water-damaged copy of Popular Mechanics he found on the chair, then helped Floyd back to the car and home again. On his way out of Grady, walking back through the main corridor toward the parking deck, he passed a gift shop, a coffee kiosk, a row of chairs with people staring at phones. He was almost at the exit when something made him slow down. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The particular quiet that happens when someone is trying very hard not to make noise. He turned. An older woman, sitting on the floor between 2 chairs, legs partly extended, one hand braced against the wall, the other reaching toward the armrest of the nearest chair that was just slightly too far away. White hair pulled back, pale green cardigan, small frame. She'd been trying to get herself up and she couldn't. And from the set of her jaw, it was clear she'd been trying for a while. And people had walked past, Alton stood there for 3 seconds and counted 4 people go by without stopping. He walked over. He didn't announce himself. He just crouched down carefully. His back registered the objection and said, "Let me get that chair closer." He slid the chair 2 feet to the left so the armrest was within reach. Then he said, "I'm going to put my hand here," meaning his forearm, "so you've got something steady to push against. You do the lifting. I'm just the wall." She looked at him, sharp brown eyes that didn't match how the rest of her looked right now. "All right," she said. It took about 30 seconds. She pushed, he held, she was up. She stood with her hand on the armrest and breathed for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was composed, but something underneath it wasn't. "You need me to find someone? A nurse?" "No," she said it quickly. Then, softer, "I was waiting for someone, and I sat too long, and my hip seized up." "It happens." He nodded. He understood hips that did things they weren't supposed to. She looked at him. He looked like a man who worked with his hands and had delivered an elderly stranger to this hospital for no particular personal gain. None of that was visible to her. What she saw was a man with a limp and a flannel shirt who had stopped when nobody else did. He said, "You sure you're all right?" She said, "I'm sure." "Thank you, Mr. Peck." "Alton Peck." "Marion," she said. She didn't offer a last name. He nodded, turned to go. He had 40 minutes before he needed to pick up his next transport. "Mr. Peck." He stopped. She was still watching him, something calculating in it, but not unkind. "Are you in a hurry?" He looked at the clock on the wall. "Not quite," he said. "Will you sit with me for a few minutes? I have a bad habit of falling when I'm on my own too long, and I don't want to give this floor another opportunity." That almost made him smile. He sat in the chair next to her. They didn't talk for a bit. That was fine with him. Then she said, "What do you do, Mr. Peck?" "Currently? Transport. Drive patients to their appointments. Before that? Pipe fitting. Commercial builds, mostly. 31 years, she considered that. And now you drive people to hospitals." He shrugged. "Pays all right. I'm saving for something." He didn't know why he said that. He didn't usually tell people things. She turned her head slightly toward him. "What are you saving for?" he told her. "The space on Commerce Drive. The program. 8 to 10 students at a time. Trade skills. People who needed a way in and couldn't wait 3 years for a union list." He said it plainly, without selling it, because he wasn't selling it. He was just describing what he planned to do. She listened without interrupting. That was unusual. When he finished, she said, "How far are you from the number?" He said, $8,200, give or take. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's not very far." He almost said, "Feels far from where I'm standing." But he didn't, because it wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact. His phone buzzed. Next pickup in 35 minutes. He stood up carefully. His back was fine. Better than usual, actually. "It was good to meet you, Marion." "You too, Mr. Peck." He walked to the parking deck, got in his van, sat for a second before starting the engine. He thought about the woman on the floor. The 4 people who'd walked past. He thought about Floyd, 91 years old, who always said thank you 3 times before getting out of the car. He didn't think about much else. He didn't know that Marion, still sitting in that chair in the main corridor of Grady Memorial, had already taken out her phone. He didn't know who she was calling, or why. He didn't know that by the time he got home that night, someone across the city already knew his name. He found out 12 days later. 12 days of the same routine. Transport in the morning, small plumbing jobs in the afternoon when his back allowed, evenings at the kitchen table with a legal pad doing the math again. The number had gone up slightly. The space on Commerce Drive had a competitor offer now. He'd have to move faster or lose it. On a Wednesday afternoon, he was replacing a shutoff valve under a bathroom sink for an elderly woman named Ruth, who'd gotten his number from her neighbor when his phone rang. Unknown number, Atlanta area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. He answered out of habit. "Mr. Peck?" "Yes. My name is Lou Calder. I'm calling on behalf of Marion Forsyth. She asked me to reach out to you." He put the wrench down on the towel he'd spread across the bathroom floor. "Marion." "She's the woman from Grady," he said. Not a question. Yes, sir. She wanted me to pass along that she's doing well. Her hip is fine, and she'd like to meet with you, if you're open to it. Alton was quiet for a moment. He was aware of Ruth, standing in the doorway of the bathroom, pretending to look at something on the wall. What does she want to meet about? He asked. She said to tell you it's about Commerce Drive. He sat very still on the bathroom floor, with his hand resting on the shutoff valve. When? He said. Whenever works for you, sir. She's flexible. He finished the job at Ruth's, washed his hands, accepted the cash she pressed on him, even though they'd agreed on less, and sat in his van for 10 minutes before driving anywhere. Marion Forsythe. He'd looked up the name that same night, after getting home and eating the pork chop he'd had defrosting in the fridge. He almost hadn't. Part of him didn't want to know. But he looked. Marion Agnes Forsythe, 74 years old, founder of Forsythe Community Partners, a real estate development firm based in Atlanta that had spent the last 30 years building affordable workforce housing across 5 southeastern states. She'd been profiled in Atlanta Business Chronicle 3 times. There was a photograph of her at a ribbon cutting, same white hair, same composed expression, sharp brown eyes. And a quote underneath it that he read twice. The people who build this city deserve to live in it. He closed his laptop. He sat in his kitchen for a while. He looked at the lease printout on the counter, $8,200 gap. He thought about how he'd almost kept walking. How the pull toward the exit had been real, not cruel, just habit. Keep moving. Not your business. You've got somewhere to be. He was glad he'd turned around. He met Marion Forsythe at her office on Peachtree Street, 12 days after the hospital. 20th floor. The kind of building Alton had installed pipe in 3 decades ago and never gone back to since. The receptionist offered him coffee. He said yes, mostly because he didn't know what else to say. Marion was already in the conference room when they brought him in. She looked different here, her posture different. The cardigan replaced with a dark blazer, the air around her arranged differently. But the eyes were the same. She stood up when he came in. That surprised him. Mr. Peck. Thank you for coming. He sat across from her, accepted the coffee. She didn't waste time. I looked into you, she said. I hope that doesn't put you off. I do it with everyone I might work with. He said, what did you find? She said, 31 years in the trades. Clean record. 3 people at a church on Glenwood gave you unsolicited references when my assistant called. You didn't list them. They just mentioned you. A pastor named Colbert said you fixed the water heater in the fellowship hall twice and wouldn't accept anything for it. He also said, and I'm quoting here, Alton doesn't talk much, but when something needs doing, he's already doing it. Alton looked at his coffee. She continued, I also found out that you've been informally training young people in trade skills for years. Lunch breaks, weekends, without pay, without credit. She paused. You never thought to charge for that? He shrugged. They didn't have money. If they had money, they wouldn't need me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I've been looking for the right person to run a workforce development program for 2 years. Something local, embedded in the community, not parachuted in from a nonprofit headquarters 3 states away. I've talked to 7 people. Some of them had impressive credentials. One of them had a TEDx talk. He didn't respond. None of them had what you have, she said. He waited. The program I want to fund is exactly what you described in that hospital corridor. Mr. Peck, trades training. Real skills, not certificates that don't lead anywhere. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC, carpentry. Cohorts of 8 to 12 people at a time. We build the space, we supply the equipment, we cover operating costs for 5 years minimum. You design the curriculum, you run it. He stared at her. She stared back. Marion Forsythe was not a person who blinked first. He said, what's the catch? She almost smiled. No catch. Location is non-negotiable. We're developing a mixed-use parcel on Commerce Drive, affordable housing above, retail and community space below. One of those spaces was going to be a dry cleaner. It's yours if you want it. He opened his mouth, closed it. Commerce Drive, he said. She nodded. That's the street where... I know, she said. Lou found the lease printout in your records when he was doing background. It was the first thing that made me certain. He looked at the table for a long moment. He said, "The people in the program, they'd get real certifications? Job placement? Licensed certs," she said. "We have contractor relationships across the metro. Not guaranteed placement, but guaranteed interviews. And we pay a stipend during training, so people don't have to choose between class and a shift." "A stipend," he said. "So people don't have to choose between class and a shift," she repeated. He thought about every kid he'd trained on a lunch break. The ones who'd had to disappear for weeks because a second job demanded it. The ones who'd almost made it through and then hadn't because life didn't stop moving, just because you were trying to learn something. He said, "I want final say on curriculum, of course, and I want to hire from the graduates." She nodded. That was already in the plan. He sat back. He had a vision of the space on Commerce Drive, the way it looked when he'd first walked through it 14 months ago, empty and smelling of old drywall. He'd stood in the middle of it and seen very clearly what it could be. He'd told exactly no one about that vision, because a man with a limp and a flannel shirt standing in an empty room didn't usually get to say things like, "I can see what this becomes." "Mr. Peck," she said. He looked up. "In that hallway," she said, "I counted the people who walked past me. It was a habit I developed years ago in boardrooms, counting who was paying attention." She paused. "I counted 11 people. You were the 12th, the only one who turned around." He didn't say anything. She said, "I've been in rooms with very accomplished people for a long time. I've shaken a lot of hands. The thing that doesn't scale, the thing you can't train into someone, is the instinct to turn around when you almost didn't." She picked up her pen, set it down again. "That's not nothing, Mr. Peck. That's actually everything," he said. "I just moved a chair." She said, "You were late to a pickup. You were hurting. And you still stopped. Don't minimize it." He looked at the window, the Atlanta skyline. Buildings he knew from the inside. Pipe he'd laid in walls that were now 3 decades old and still running clean. He said, "All right, just that. All right." She extended her hand across the table. He shook it. She said, "Your mother raised you down here?" He said, "Macon. She passed about 6 years ago. She said she did a good job." He almost said something. Didn't. Just nodded once and picked up his coffee. Commerce Drive looked different 8 months later. The empty storefront, the one with the old drywall smell and the overhead lights that flickered on the left side, was now the Peck Trades Institute. Steel doors. New electrical throughout. A workshop in the back with proper ventilation. Tool stations, 10 of them, laid out the way Alton had sketched them on a legal pad at his kitchen table on a Tuesday night when he couldn't sleep. A small classroom in the front, with whiteboards and folding tables. A resource wall with job listings, certification schedules, and a chart showing average starting wages for licensed trades in Georgia. No carpet, concrete floors, sealed and clean. Alton had specified that. Easier to maintain, and it looked like what it was, a working space. Forsyth Community Partners had moved fast. Marion, it turned out, did not move slowly when she'd made a decision. Within 3 weeks of their meeting, the paperwork was signed. Within 5 months, construction was done. Alton had been on site nearly every day, not managing from a distance, but in it. Reviewing the electrical with the contractor, walking the plumbing layout, flagging a ventilation issue in the welding station that the plans had missed. The contractor's foreman, a man named Victor, had asked on the 3rd site visit why the client rep walked the pipe like he'd installed it himself. Alton said, "Because I have." Victor laughed and started listening differently. Opening week, the first cohort was 12 people. The youngest was 19. A kid named Jalen who'd been working at a car wash and had a 9-month-old at home. The oldest was 58, a woman named Donna who'd been laid off from a hotel housekeeping job and had decided at 58 that she was not going to start over at the bottom again. She wanted a skill that paid. Alton told them on day 1. This is not a program where you show up for a certificate. The certificate comes after you can actually do the work. If you can do the work, the certificate is just paperwork. Donna nodded like she'd been waiting for someone to say that for years. By week 4, Jalen was ahead on the electrical module, He had a way of understanding circuits that wasn't from the manual. It was intuitive, the kind of thing you couldn't teach but could develop if someone gave you the framework. Alton gave him extra time on the board. Called it tutoring. Jalen called it what it was. "You're training me to teach, aren't you?" Alton said. "Maybe. Depends on how the next 6 weeks go." Jalen grinned. Went back to the board. Marian visited once a month. She didn't make speeches. She walked the floor, watched the students work, asked Alton pointed questions about what was working and what wasn't. He gave her honest answers. She didn't push back on the things that weren't working. She just asked what he needed to fix them, and then she got it. In month 4, Donna passed her plumbing certification exam on the first try. She called Alton from outside the testing center. He could hear in her voice that she'd been crying. She said, "I just needed someone to show me it was possible." He said, "You showed yourself. I just moved some chairs around." She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that had some weight to it. 6 months in, the numbers were what they were. 22 of 26 students who'd completed the first cohort passed at least one licensing exam. 14 were employed with Forsyth contractor partners. Starting wages ranged from $41,000 to $68,000 a year. Alton taped the chart to the resource wall. Not to brag, because the students who came after needed to see it was real. The church on Glenwood, the one where he'd fixed the water heater twice for free. Pastor Colbert put a flyer in the bulletin. The response filled the second cohort in 11 days. There were 2 things on the wall of Alton's small office at the back of the building. One was the original lease printout for the Commerce Drive space, the one he'd been carrying in his shirt pocket for 11 months. He'd had it framed, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder that the gap between where you are and where you're going has a number, and numbers can be closed. The other was a photograph, Marian at the opening shaking Alton's hand. It wasn't a posed shot. Someone had taken it mid-shake, both of them looking at each other instead of the camera. You could not tell from looking at it that 6 months before she'd been sitting on a hospital floor trying to pull herself up, or that he'd almost kept walking. Almost. 1 year later, Alton was leaving the building late on a Tuesday. The second cohort had finished their 6th week. He had a site visit scheduled for Thursday on a potential expansion space. The unit next door, which had come available. He was still doing the math. Some things don't change. He walked to his truck. Newer, reliable. Heat that worked on both sides. He passed the bus shelter at the end of the block. A woman was sitting on the bench. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Coat not warm enough for October. A paper bag at her feet from the grocery store. Her head was down. She looked like someone who had been sitting for a while and was deciding whether to keep sitting or give up on the bus entirely. He almost kept walking. The familiar pull. "You've got somewhere to be. It's late. It's not your business." He stopped. "You need a ride?" he said. "Bus been irregular tonight." She looked up, guarded. The way people look when they've been let down enough times that kindness registers as a possible trick. "I'm just going to Glenwood," she said. "It's not far," he said. "Neither is my truck. Come on." She picked up the bag, got in. Her name was Vivienne. She'd just started a new job, 3rd shift at a distribution center, and was trying to figure out the bus schedule. And the app was wrong, and she'd been out here 40 minutes. She said it without complaint, just as facts, the way people do when they're used to things not working out quite right. He said, "The trades program on Commerce Drive. You ever hear of it?" She said, "The Peck Institute?" "Yeah, my cousin's in the 2nd cohort." He said, "Who's your cousin?" She said, "Donna." He looked at the road and smiled. He dropped Vivienne at her building on Glenwood. She thanked him twice. He said, "Get some sleep." She nodded and went inside. He sat in the truck for a moment after the door closed. He thought about a hospital corridor on a Tuesday afternoon, an elderly woman on the floor. 11 people who didn't stop. A moment when he almost didn't either. He thought about the number on the lease printout. $8,200, and how a number that seemed enormous from one direction could seem almost nothing from another. Not because it got smaller, because something around it changed. He drove home. The city moved past the windows, lit up and ongoing, full of people who were about to make a decision they didn't know they were making. Stop or don't. Turn around or don't. Move a chair 2 feet to the left or keep going toward the exit. He knew which one he'd choose. He'd already chosen it. I've been thinking about that hospital corridor for a while now. About the 11 people who walked past and the one who didn't. And here's what I keep coming back to. Alton Peck wasn't a man who had extra to give. He had a bad back, a daughter who called on Sundays when she remembered, and $8,200 standing between him and the thing he'd been building toward for 2 years. He had every reason to keep walking. But he turned around, not because he knew who she was, not because he saw a reward coming. He turned around because someone was on the floor, and he knew how to move a chair. That's it. That's the whole thing. We talk about generosity like it's a personality trait you either have or you don't. Like some people are just built for it, and the rest of us are waiting until we have enough time, enough money, enough stability. But Alton didn't wait, and most of the people I know who make the biggest difference in the rooms they walk into, they're not the ones with the most margin. They're the ones who stopped calculating margin a long time ago. I keep thinking about the 11 people who walked past Marion in that corridor. Most of them probably meant well. Most of them probably had somewhere to be. I'm not here to judge them, because I don't know that I wouldn't have been one of them on a different day. But I think about what it cost them. Not money, not time, just the thing they could have been in that moment and weren't. Alton turned around. That's all. And it turned out the woman on the floor had spent 40 years asking the same question he was asking, just from a different side of it. Who actually does the work that holds a city together, and how do we make sure they can afford to stay? If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with somebody today. And tell me honestly in the comments, if you'd been walking through that hospital, would you have stopped? Because I think the answer matters, not to me. To you. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and come back because there are more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people doing the thing that turns out to be everything. I'll see you in the next one. You don't have to have a lot to give a lot. Alton knew that. And now, so do you.